Okay, just going to give a minute and see. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ashley, and I'm here on the marketing team at Candu. And today we're going to be going over how to think like a product designer, and these are UX UI tips for non-designers. And today we're going to have an interview with Rocío, who's from Candu, our very own product designer. And Rocío, if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so I'm Rocío. I live in Spain and I work. I've been working in Candu for almost 2.5 years. And in Candu, I am working as the product designer. Also, I work with brand design and communication, but mostly my primary job is to make sure the product works and is user friendly. So yeah, and here we are.
Awesome. It's so great to get to talk to you this morning. I think a lot of people who are starting with Nocode kind of, may not have a design background, and it's interesting to kind of dive into it and, think about things like, how do you plan and approach a product or a project as a product designer? So I'd like to get into your head a little bit and just kind of understand how you start your process.
Yeah, so I use the design thinking methodology, which is an iterative process for solving problems by prioritizing the user needs above all else. So there are different phases of the design thinking process: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So maybe I can go one by one. The first one is the empathy one. If you go the next slide, yeah. So the starting point is empathizing with the user. During this phase, the designer will use different methodologies to find pain points and opportunities based on qualitative and quantitative research, such as user interviews, KPI, empathy maps, and many other methods. A fun one that we've done in Candu is the love breakup letter, in where the stakeholders wrote a love letter and a breakup letter to our editor. And this way we define the main strengths and weaknesses of it. And here is an example of what we did. Second one would be define. Yeah, so once the designer has spot the user needs, it's time to define the main pain points and opportunities of the specific story that we want to solve. Depending on the project, the designer should use a particular methodology for this phase. I find very useful to work with user journeys, in where the different phases of the user are defined, like the example that we are sharing. Other interesting method would be the critical incident technique that we've used in Candu as well, or case study we use very frequently. This will define the hypothesis and will be followed during the process. So, for example, in this user journey, this is the one that we did on our last iteration of the editor. And if you can see in blue, you see all the actions per phases. In red, you see the pain points. In yellow, the happy moments. In pink, the opportunities. And at the bottom, I like to add an emotion graph to define the user's feeling during each step.
Let me just zoom in on some of that real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, and we'll include all of this in a follow-up ebook and share this out. But this is super interesting to see how you all have laid this out. Would you say this is a typical process for most product designers and development teams, engineers?
Yeah, I think this is one of the main methodologies that you can use within the design thinking process.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really useful too, because you can see like all the faces and all the emotions of different kind of users.
So we'll jump over to ideate.
Yeah, so once the hypothesis is identified, it's time to jump into the ideation phase, consisting on designing one or several ideas that would solve the user need. Depending on the need of the project, we can use sketching, mind mapping, diagrams, etc. There's a very fun workshop for this phase, which is the Crazy Eights. It's called the Crazy Eights, and it consists on fast drawing 8 ideas and discussing them collaboratively afterwards. So I like doing fire flows because they are very useful. They help us visualizing low fidelity designs within the user flow. And this is the one that I shared as an example for ideate in the screen.
Gotcha. So would you say, like, when you do this Crazy Eights or fives, or do you feel like you have to kind of let go of having like bad ideas, or this, notion that, everything has to be perfect? It's really just about kind of everybody collaborating with each other.
Exactly. So this phase is more about the idea than the final polished design. So you cannot worry about, I don't know, things like the alignment or color of the button or this kind of things. It's more, sometimes I just do sketching in a paper, and that's it, because that helps focusing on the idea itself instead of the details.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what's so interesting about Candu, is you can kind of move things around in real time and see. So somebody who's maybe not a designer and doesn't know how to sketch, or doesn't have that sort of thinking, can kind of just dive in and move stuff around and see kind of their own wireframe in real time, or their ideas come to life in real time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so this is a very important phase, the prototyping. So ideally, the low fee prototype will be designed first to test with users and share with stakeholders, and then you design the high fidelity prototype. In my experience, it's very useful to do an interactive high fee prototype and do from 5 to 10 moderated user testing to confirm the hypothesis before implementing the prototype. And then in this phase, it's essential to work with a good design system to improve the quality of the designs and help with faster iterations, as well as improving team collaboration. I use Figma for this phase.
Nice. And for somebody who doesn't know what a design system is, can you just briefly explain what Figma does and kind of how it helps you?
Yeah, well, we'll see design systems
at the end.
The concept later. I have prepared a little bit of information about this, but it's the single source of truth in where the team should go to use all the components and all the information regarding how to build a design, basically. Yeah, and then the last phase is the test phase. So we need to measure the success of the design and to corroborate the hypothesis. And depending on the project, this can be done using KPIs, heat maps, as the one in the example. After implementation in Candu, we normally do also an internal testing session to spot bugs and issues before making the feature live to end users. I think it's very useful sometimes to do A/B testing, but sometimes it's a bit too expensive in terms of the team effort. And then the design thinking is an iterative process. So from this phase, you go back to find a new user need.
Great. And just real quick, can you explain what this heat map is for people who might not be familiar with it and the function that it serves?
Yeah, so this is just an example. This is not from Candu, but the idea is that you test where do people click most or move the mouse to, or these kind of things. And you have like a heat map visualizing it.
And it kind of tells you, where users are interacting, maybe spots that they're
Exactly.
missing, and cool.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so for me, how does the design thinking benefit, non-designers and the overall collaborative process? So is this design something, design thinking, is that something that, just anyone can use on a daily basis?
Yeah, design thinking. Well, I mean, if you know how to use it, it's something you can use for daily basis for sure. Yeah, I actually recently read a post about a designer. It was funny. It's a designer doing like evaluating her life and using design thinking methodologies to evaluate her personal life. So yeah, you can apply it to many things, not only to design actually. But I think it benefits mainly the end user, whoever, depending on the product, whoever it is, as it's a human-centric approach. During the different phases of the methodology, there can be lots of collaborative exercise that would give the opportunity to raise opinions and perceptions to stakeholders, users, and the different people in the team. So design thinking is mainly a collaborative methodology for sure. And the design listens and keeps those insights in mind while designing. So in the end, every participant is designing the feature or solution in a way.
Nice. Yeah, it seems like especially the empathy and ideation phase really allows that collaboration, like that activity with the letters to the editor. I just think that's so fun.
Yeah.
So what are some basic research methods to consider when you're planning user interface UI?
I think for UI specifically is really useful to work on case of study or observation methods before jumping into the prototype phase. For ideation and prototyping, storyboards and low fee or high fee wireframes will be very useful too.
And what are a few key terms that might help, beginners describe the UI as they're improving on it? So this is like a big part of somebody getting into Nocode, using these tools as they're collaborating. How do they know, what to say about the things that they're creating? Maybe they're working with engineers, maybe they're working with other product designers to bring these ideas to life. So it's helpful to be able to kind of speak the language.
Yeah, so there's a lot of terms actually.
Yeah.
But I think first of all, it's important to know the difference in between UX and UI.
Yes.
UX is focused on flows, user journeys, information architecture, etc. And UI is focused on interface, composition, look and feel of the component, visual hierarchy, etc. But I can, we can go through some of the most commonly used terms. So for example, accessibility means a UI that is easy to interact with to a wide range of people, including people with disabilities. It used a balanced color scheme, alternative keyboard controls, special page layout, customized versions, and other tools to help people with disabilities use the product. Another one would be a very common one, landing page, which is the website where the user first lands. Another one, for example, is CTA, which is called to action, which is the most commonly used type of a button. Usability, which is the ease of use and simplicity of the product. Responsive design, which is the adaptation, adapt the size of the website to any device screen. And then we need to know the difference in between component library and design system. I think if you go to the next screen. Yeah, so here we have some examples. I added some screenshots of the Candu design system. So a component library is common components used throughout the application. For example, a UI kit, and it's responsive for web, it's flexible, and it's scalable. And the design system is what we talked about before, the single source of truth, which groups all the elements that will allow the team to design, realize, and develop the product. The design system contains rules and guidelines on how to create new components or implement them in either design or code. So the design system includes the component library, but also a pattern library, design guidelines, brand value, tone of voice, and wherever is relevant to the product. And then, yeah, and here we have, this is very interesting because it's how we organize the design system, and it is through the concept of atoms that are basic UI elements that cannot be broken down any further. For example, icons or buttons. Molecules, they are a group of atoms that form a more complex component, such as a search bar, for example. The search bar component will include the input field, search button, and icon in this example, for example. Organisms are the even more complex components that can include both molecules and atoms, such as, for example, the top bar navigation. The bar may include the navigational atoms, such as home and login, along with the molecule component of the search bar and the brand icon.
And then these come together for templates and pages?
Exactly, yeah.
Awesome. So can you tell us more about visual hierarchy and just kind of other best practices when somebody's putting together a layout with a tool like Candu or any no-code? Even when you think about things like Canva, how do you think about, where you're going to place objects?
Yeah, so some UI tips would be, for example, simplicity. Keep the interface simple. Every decision needs to respond to a communication improvement for the user. If it doesn't, don't do it. This is the most important to me. Then consistency, create consistency between the different components. And this is where the atomic design is interesting. Familiarity, use common UI elements, don't reinvent the wheel. Layouting, be purposeful in page layout and avoid overcomplicating it. Hierarchy, use typography and other components to create hierarchy and clarity. So visual hierarchy is useful to highlight one or more elements that are more important than the other, which is needed to successfully communicate a message. These and other design rules can be applied by playing with the gestaltic rules of perceptions, which we can see in the screen. And I always keep in mind this while designing. I find them really useful. And we have 6 main rules. Well, actually 7. So the first one would be proximity, which is things that are close together seem more related than things that are spaced farther apart. Continuity, elements in a line or curve seems more related to one another than those positioned randomly. For example, text in the books, the text usually follow this rule, no? Like they are groups of letters that are put together in a line. Closure, we perceive elements as belonging to the same group if they seem to complete some entity. Our brain automatically completes the shape. Similarity, similar things tend to appear grouped together. Figure ground, the tendency of the visual system to simplify a scene into the main object that we are looking at. the figure and the background. And uniform connectedness, when we connect group of the same elements, they will seem as different groups. And then I said 7 because all of these creates another rule, which is pregnancy, which is order and symmetry. So yeah, I think those are very basic rules that you can apply. Like, it's a psychological kind of approach, and you can apply to every design, or even, you know, everything that you can see, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, so I added an example. So this is a design that we are currently doing in Candu. It's we are updating the contextual menu, which is before it was on the toolbox, and now we are putting it contextual. And I thought it was a good example because it follows these rules. So if I have 2 or more components that are part of the same message, I will put them all together based on the rule of proximity. This way, I don't need to verbally add extra information to the user, because the fact that they are together is already implying it, right? So in this, by moving the context, the actions, the features to closer to the selected text, then we are giving the user some information, even though it's not written anywhere, just visual information based on the rule of proximity. So, and then I also like this example because by grouping the different features of the menu by theme, we are also using a gestaltic rule. If you see, the first 2 features are actions, delete and copy. The next ones are about styling, color, bold, italic, underline. Next is layouting, and which is alignment, and then the interactions. So that will make the user more easily understand the logic, because we are implying the like, you know, the grouping by putting them close to each other, and we don't need to explain that verbally because it's already there.
Yeah, and I wonder too, is this an example of how UX and UI kind of play into each other? So when you think about the user experience, grouping these items together also, you know, it depends on how the user is going to interact with these, and perhaps you guys have found that, you know, choosing the text weight, like bold, or the color, is something that a user would typically do before they might change, you know, the alignment of the text.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, in many cases, UX and UI work collaboratively. Actually, a product designer will do both things and will keep both in mind while they are designing. And this is a good example of it. Yeah.
Awesome. So what are some common but easy to fix mistakes that you see non-designers make? This is, I think, an important one, because I think non-designers should feel free to experiment. So when I say mistakes, it's definitely in quotes. I think it's really like opportunities for people to design better, and maybe things that you see commonly.
Yeah, yeah. So, for example, when the content creator add too many elements to a composition, it overloads the composition, and the AI won't know where to look first. There won't be no pregnancy, as the symmetry that we talked about before. And I think it's better to focus on less information and show it clearly and clean. And maybe you need to add another step to wherever the design is. But there are other ways of doing this. So like avoiding overloading a composition would be one of them. Then this is a very common one, adding not needed elements. So it's a very common practice to add components that are not needed in a composition. So I think the content creator should ask the question to himself, why is this here? And if the answer is because I like it, because it's cute, or this kind of answers, then that's the signal that you have to get rid of that element, because every design component should always communicate something or be useful for something. So you have to keep it simple. Then yeah, adding too many styles, I've seen this a lot as well. But I think it's especially common in colors and typography. Ideally, a composition shouldn't need more than 3 typography styles. It really depends on the composition, okay? But I think if you can simplify the styles of the typography, sizes, and color, it's better, because then it's too much information. The eye gets too distracted and you don't have hierarchy anymore. Then there's the spacing. It's very important to keep spacing between elements consistent. To make sure it's consistent across the whole product or app, I recommend adding spacing to the design system. And I normally use multiple of 8. So something like 8 pixels is extra small, 16 is small, 24 medium, 32 large, and so on and so on. And this can also be applied, for example, to typography, not only to white spaces. And the last one that I think is very, very important is alignment and layouting. And I think it's very important because it's normally easily missed by by anybody. But it's an essential one to ensure a clean design. Making sure all elements are aligned is super important. Even when the end user don't know what's happening, there's some subconscious feeling that something is off, and that will make it look messy, although maybe it's 1 pixel difference in between a title and a text. So yeah, I think those are the most frequent, most common mistakes that I can think of.
That's great, thank you. So we're running up on time here, but this is kind of the last thing that I wanted to ask is, what are some no-code tools, just non-technical tools that non-designers can use to collaborate? So I know you mentioned Figma before. Are there any others?
Yeah, so I use Figma for prototyping and wireframing, and I use Whimsical for research normally, but there's a lot of great tools in the market. For example, I've seen people do great designs with Canva, or for web, I recommend Webflow, for example, because it's very versatile and customizable.
Thanks. I will open it up now for any questions. Look, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Just really quickly, since we have a couple of moments, can you just explain a little bit more about Whimsical and what research is like with that?
Yeah, so well, I discovered Whimsical like 3 years ago, and it was a huge difference with what I was using before. I was just using whatever software I was using for prototyping, just adding the research there, or even Google Drive, and then suddenly this appeared. And it's really useful because it's very guided. Like if you want to do a diagram, then you have all the tools for diagrams. You can select the diagram mode, and you have all the tools related to diagram. Wireframing, then select wireframing mode, and you have a lot of components already very beautifully designed, so that you don't have to worry about how it looks. And also the other part that I find very interesting is that it's a collaborative collaborative tool. So yeah, for example, we have a voting feature that I use a lot. It's really useful. I don't know. I think it's a great tool for any kind of organization, any kind of project that you need, to think collaboratively. Yeah, I really recommend it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time today. It was really interesting to sort of learn a little bit more, even though we work together, just to hear sort of your side and what you're working on. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.